Welcome back to the First Presbyterian Church Story Time, where we are reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by W.C. Lewis. And we are on the third chapter. And in this chapter, there are two words I'd like to go over with you. The first word is pax. And in the story, Edmund is trying to make pax with Lucy, which means he's trying to make peace with Lucy. Also, the word sledge. Sledge means a sleigh, like Santa's sleigh. So when you hear the word sledge, think of Santa's sleigh. And just to review, at the end of chapter 2, Lucy has gone through the wardrobe, and she has gone to Narnia and had many adventures, and she is back in the wardrobe in the room. So let's continue with chapter 3, Edmund and the Wardrobe. Lucy ran out of the empty room into the passage and found the other three. "It's all right," she repeated. "I am back." "What on earth are you talking about, Lucy?" said Susan. "Why," Lucy said in amazement, "haven't you all been wondering where I was?" "So you've been hiding, have you?" said Peter. "Poor old Lou, hiding and nobody noticed. You'll have to hide longer than that if you want people to start looking for you." "But I've been away for hours and hours," said Lucy. And the others all stared at one another. "Batty," said Edmund, tapping his head. "Quite batty." "What do you mean, Lou?" said Peter. "What I said," answered Lucy. "It was just after breakfast when I went into the wardrobe, and I've been away for hours and hours, and I had tea, and all sorts of things had happened." "Don't be silly," said Lucy. "You've just come out of the room a moment ago, and you were there then." "Oh, she's not being silly at all," said Peter. "She's just making up a story for fun, aren't you, Lou?" "And why shouldn't she?" "No, Peter, I am not," she said. It's a magic wardrobe. There's a wood inside, and it's snowing, and there's a fawn and a witch, and it's called Narnia. Come and see." The others did not know what to think, but Lucy she was just so excited that they all went back with her into the room. She rushed ahead of them, flung open the door of the wardrobe, and cried, "Now, go in and see for yourself." "Why, you goose," said Susan, putting her head inside and pulling the fur coats apart. "It's just an ordinary wardrobe. Look, there's a back to it." Then everyone looked in and pulled the coats apart, and that's when Lucy herself saw, a perfectly ordinary wardrobe. Peter went in and rapped on the back to make sure it was solid. "A jolly good hoax, Lou," he said as he came out again. "You have really taken us in. I must admit, we half believed you." "But it wasn't a hoax at all," said Lucy. "Really and truly, it was all different a moment ago. Honestly, it was. I promise." "Come, Lou," said Peter. "That's going a bit far. You've had your joke. Haven't you better just drop it now?" Lucy grew very red in the face and tried to say something, though she hardly knew what she was trying to say, and she just burst into tears. Poor Lucy. For the next few days she was miserable. She could have made it up with the others quite easily at any moment if she could have brought herself to say that, the whole thing, she just made it up for fun. But Lucy was a very truthful girl, and she knew that she was really in the right, and she could not bring herself to say this. The others, who thought she was telling a lie, and a silly lie too, made her very unhappy. The two elder ones did this without meaning to do it. But Edmund was just spiteful. And on this occasion, he was very spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy and kept on asking if she had found any other new countries in any of the wardrobes all around the house. What made it worse was the days ought to have been delightful. The weather was fine, and they were outdoors from morning till night, bathing, fishing, climbing trees, not properly enjoying any of this, and so things went on until there was a wet day. That day, when it came to the afternoon and there was still no sign of break in the weather, they decided to play hide and seek. Susan said, "I'm it," and as soon as the others scattered to hide, Lucy went back into the room where the wardrobe was. She didn't mean to hide in the wardrobe, but because she knew it was there and only to set the others talking again about the whole wretched business. But, she did want to have one more look inside it. For this time, she was beginning to wonder herself whether Nanya and the fawn were just a dream. The house was so large and complicated and full of hiding places that she thought she would have time to have looked into the wardrobe and then hide somewhere else. But as soon as she heard steps in the passage outside, and then there was nothing for it but to jump into the wardrobe. Hold on to the door she closed behind her. She didn't want to shut it properly, because it's very silly to shut oneself up in a wardrobe, even if it was not a magic wardrobe. Now the steps she heard were those of Edmund, and he came into the room just in time to see Lucy vanish in the wardrobe. He at once decided to get into it himself, not because he thought it a particularly good place to hide, but because he wanted to go on teasing her about her magic country. He opened the door. There were coats hanging in as usual, and a smell of mothballs, and darkness and silence, and no sign of Lucy. "She thinks I'm Susan, coming to fetch her," said Edmund to himself, "and so she's keeping quiet." He jumped in and shut the door, forgetting that it was very foolish to do that, to shut the door in the wardrobe and be inside. Then he began feeling about for Lucy in the dark. He expected to find her in seconds, and very surprised that he could not find her. But he didn't find the door either. He didn't think that it was all that groping in wild directions, and he was shouting, "Lucy, Lou, where are you? I don't know where you are. Where are you?" There was no answer, and Edmund noticed that his own voice had a curious sound. Not the sound you would expect in a cupboard, but one that as if you were out in the open air. He also noticed that it was unexpectedly cold. And then he saw a light. "Oh, thank goodness," said Edmund. "The door must have swung open on its own." He forgot all about Lucy and went towards the light, which he thought was open door of the wardrobe. But instead of finding himself stepping into the spare room, he found himself stepping from the shadow of some thick, dark fir trees into an open space in the middle of the wood. There was the crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying in the branches of the trees. Overhead there was a pale blue sky, the sort of sky the one sees on a winter day in the morning. Straight ahead of him, he saw between the tree trunks the sun. It was just rising. It was very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he was the only living creature in the country. There was not even a robin or a squirrel amongst the trees. The woods stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He now remembered that he had been looking for Lucy, and also how unpleasant he had been to her about this imaginary country, which now turned not to be imaginary at all. He thought that he might just somewhere Lucy would be close by, so he shouted, "Lucy, Lou, Lucy, I'm here too, it's Edmund." She's angry. All these things I've been saying to her lately, thought Edmund. And he thought he did not like to admit that he was wrong, but he also did not like being alone in this strange, cold, quiet place. So he shouted again, "I say, Lou, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. I see now that you were right all along. Do come. Let's make a pact." Still there was no answer. "Just like a girl," said Edmund, he said to himself, sulking somewhere, and wouldn't accept an apology. He looked around again and decided he did not much like this place, and he must make up his mind to go home. And then he heard far off in the wood the sounds of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last a sled swept right in front of him, drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of shepherd ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked as white compared to them. Their branching horns were gilded, and they shone like something on fire when the sun got them. Their harness was a scarlet leather and covered with bells, and on the sleigh, driving the reindeer, sat a dwarf, who had been there about 3 feet high if he was standing. He was dressed in a polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long golden tassel hanging down at the point. His huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. But behind him, on a much higher seat, in the middle of the sledge, was a very different person, a great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She was also covered in white fur, but on her throat held a long, straight golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head, and her face was white, not nearly pale, but white like the snow, like paper, like white icing sugar. Oh, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and very stern face. The sledge was a sight as it came sweeping towards Edmund with its bells jingling, and the dwarf crackling his whip, and the snow flying up at each other on one side and another. "Stop," said the lady, and the dwarf pulled the reins so sharp that almost they sat down, and they covered themselves, and they stood champering with bits and blowing. In the frosty air the breath came out of their nostrils like smoke. "And what, pray you," said the lady, looking hard at Edmund. My name is Edmund," said Edmund rather awkwardly. He did not like the way she looked at him, and the lady frowned. "Is that how you address the Queen?" she asked, looking sterner than ever. "I beg your pardon, your Majesty, I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know the Queen of Narnia?" she cried. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter. But I repeat, who are you?" "Please, your Majesty," said Edmund, "I don't know what you mean. I'm at school, at least I was, and it's holiday now." End of chapter 3. Thank you and have a great week.